Hello, and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. This is the show where every week Tony Ortega and I get together and we go over the week's events in the world of Scientology. And this week, there were some events. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Big week. Lots of news breaking this week.
Yeah. We got a little political kind of stories this week. Let's start, though, with Danny Masterson, because there was some motion or lack of, I guess you could say, with his appeal this week. What happened? What would you report on?
Well, this was a big week. This week, I started out, got a little scoop. I beat the LA Times by a few hours, so that was always fun. To a big story about the fact that for some time now, the defense team has been reaching out to the jurors of the second trial. And we know from the first trial that jurors can give interviews if they want. There's nothing wrong with that. They can, jurors sometimes hold press conferences after a trial, right? Okay, nothing wrong with that. And I was sitting right there in court when the judge told these jurors, you can talk to anybody, but you can't do a book deal. You can't get paid for at least 90 days. That's the only thing they don't want you to do right away. Is if you're going to make money, you got to wait. But otherwise, they're free to talk if they want to. But jurors are also free not to talk if they don't want to. And so what Judge Olmedo did right at the end of that trial, she sealed all their information because she didn't want anybody bugging them. So that was May 31st of last year when Danny was convicted. He wasn't sentenced for a couple more months, but in that period, in July 2023, one of the jurors emailed the court saying that Sean Hawley had reached out to her and wanted to have a meeting. And the juror was just really confused. How would she know who I am? Well, I looked up my notes. The woman identified herself in the email as the foreperson for the jury. And so I went back and looked at my notes because I was in the courtroom during jury selection. And the woman who ended up being the foreperson had identified herself as a employee of a particular Institute of Higher Learning there in Los Angeles. So I guess that was enough information that Sean Hawley was able to figure out who she was and emailed her. They had lunch. That's not really what started the controversy. The controversy is about a year later, in August of this year. The court got a very different email from one of those jurors who was complaining that their information had been leaked, that members of the defense appellate team had been showing up at their homes, and they were really unhappy about it. And then about a month later, and that was also just addressed generally to the court, but a month later, there was an email on September 16th. There was an email of this month. There was an email directed directly to Judge Olmedo. And I think that's what made the difference, was that maybe Judge Olmedo didn't quite realize what was going on until one of the jurors emailed her directly. And I printed that email in full. It was by a woman juror who was an alternate, said she was in her front yard doing some yard work. And this woman shows up out of nowhere and just says, "Hi, I'm working with Danny Masterson's appeal team, and I'm wondering if you wanted to discuss some things." And apparently she wanted to talk about disruptions in the courtroom that led Judge Olmedo to sequester the jury. And I don't know what else they wanted to talk about, but the juror said, "No, I'm not interested." And so the person went away. But the juror was upset about how do they even know who I am or where I live. So they sent that email to Judge Olmedo on September 16th. The very next day, on September 17th, Judge Olmedo issued a ruling telling the defense you cannot contact any jurors except through the court. And she wrote a letter to both sides. You could tell she was really unhappy. And she suggested that the defense may have actually violated the court's, codes of civil procedure.
Wow.
So then this last week, the prosecutors then filed a motion asking for an evidentiary hearing and the possibility of sanctions against the defense for doing this. So I found out that had been filed. I got into the court docket. I got these documents out. They included the email. So that's what I published on Monday morning. Big story. People were shocked. I think, naturally the question is, Is Scientology involved at all? Because we watched over a couple of years that time and again, Danny's defense had some sort of involvement with Scientology. This is not the first time that Danny's attorneys have gotten in trouble with Judge Olmedo. Remember that his previous defense team, Tom Mesro and Sharon Applebaum, they were sanctioned by Judge Olmedo because they leaked very sensitive evidence in the case to the Church of Scientology. And Scientology was clearly giving these defense attorneys some instructions at some point. So I was curious if possibly the defense was involved. Like I said, the LA Times had a story came out a little bit after mine, and they had actually talked to one of the appellate attorneys who said, no, those were my investigators. So, and he argued that they had not violated her sealing order. So I don't know if Judge Olmedo is going to go ahead with the hearing, possibly look at sanctions. I check the docket every day. I haven't seen a hearing set up. I don't know. But, once again, it's just like, one of the questions I have, Chris, is that this guy went through 2 full criminal trials, the second of which put him in prison, with very high-priced attorneys, like people like Sean Hawley. And now he's paying a couple of the top appellate attorneys, post-conviction attorneys, specialists. And they've got investigators that are tracking down jurors. Where does he still have this money? And I think a lot of people wondered if he's not getting help by Dave. Then the question is, I thought he was declared. I've seen no evidence, no real evidence that Danny Masterson's been declared by the Church of Scientology. And I've seen other things that suggest to me that he's still in good standing. So it would not shock me if it turned out the Church of Scientology was helping to pay his bill. But he's got some money coming from somewhere. And this week we were supposed to see the appeal brief. That's why you send those investigators to talk to the jurors, is that these appeal attorneys are trying to come up with some arguments to convince an appeals court that Danny's rights were violated during the trial. So that was supposed to be in this week. We'd finally get a look at what are their arguments going to be. But they got another extension. We found out this week. They got another extension. Now they've got until December 23rd to turn in this appeal brief. But the court added that no more, no further. That's it. They've got to turn something in by December 23rd. So at that point, we'll see. And, I expect them to try all kinds of things. Like, I just, feel like they're, what they have to do is convince an appeals court that this criminal trial was unfair to Danny. So what are they going to do? They're going to argue that Judge Olmedo, when she expanded the amount of Scientology that could be included in the trial, that was an error. So things like that. They'll argue that. But it's going to be interesting. We want to see that and hope, but we have to wait another month, Chris.
Right. And, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that what we're looking at here then is his new appellate team, which is not the same team that defended him in his criminal trials, which is where Sean Hawley comes into this, right? So she has an interesting conversation with a juror, but it's not necessarily connected with this. But his appellate team is trying to track down and has been tracking down jurors. So clearly they're one of their vectors of defense, or one of their points of why we should, let Danny out, is because the jurors were somehow influenced, or maybe they're pursuing this line because we know about incidents during the trial and that sort of thing that you've also reported on. So it appears that they're not only looking for procedural problems, but also for, what maybe, I don't know what the legal term is, jury influence or tampering.
Well, you remember during the trial, Philip Cohen would call for a mistrial every other day. And it got to the point where my readers were almost having a pool over whether there's going to be a call for mistrial today or not. But clearly there were some disruptions in the courtroom. And at one point, Philip Cohen asked for a mistrial on that. Judge Olmedo cleared the courtroom. She brought in the jurors and interviewed them one by one to make sure that they weren't compromised by the disruptions, and then went ahead. But of course, the defense is going to raise questions about that. They're going to raise questions about everything, and so don't be surprised that they go after that and everything else in this appeal brief. But I'd like to see it.
Right, exactly. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because I want people to understand that this isn't retaliatory. They're not trying to track these jurors down so they can do something to them or fair game them.
No.
This is about Danny's defense. And
right, they want to talk to these jurors to see if there's anything they have to say about what went on in the jury room, or what they perceived happened in the courtroom, that they can then turn into some kind of an argument that Danny's rights were violated during the trial.
exactly.
And then they can argue that they want the conviction cleared away, and they want Danny to get a new trial, and then the DA would have to decide if they want to go for a third criminal trial. I mean, that's the goal. Journalists I've talked to say that it's got a long shot for him, because you've got this jury. They were unanimous. They heard all the evidence, and it's going to be hard for an appeals court to overturn that. But we've seen it. We've seen it in cases all the time that appeals courts second guess these trial judges and vacate convictions. So it's a very important process, and it helps for somebody like Danny that he's got such expensive, high reputation post conviction attorneys. But then again, you wonder how can he be paid for this?
That question, I think, is a really good question, and because I have to wonder, the guy's sitting in prison, does he have stocks? Like, where's all this money coming from? And two, the shenanigans involved around this man and his court cases, as you brought up, I had to reinforce this point, that Scientology is swimming behind the scenes, sharing information that they shouldn't even have in the first place. This was the whole point of the first attorneys going before the judge, sharing information they shouldn't have, right? And Scientology isn't under any obligation or court order to not do what it does when it gets information. So, so we've got a problem here. And I hope Judge Almeida in this evidentiary hearing, I hope, all this stuff comes up, because she's aware of that past history. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I just thought I'd throw those things into the fire.
Yeah.
Because Scientology is a little bit of a toxic stew, isn't it? So when it's around behind the scenes, you got to go, is everything on the up and up? Well, here's some up and up explanations for what's going on. But with Scientology as the joker in the mix, you never really know if that's what's really going on.
Well, I remember when things started, and longtime former Scientologists were telling me, look, Tony, the guy's accused of such horrific things. Scientology is just going to drop him like a hot rock. That's what they do to a Scientologist that's accused of these things. And it just didn't happen. Time and time again, we saw Scientology interference in this case. I guess it's the celebrity angle. I guess it's the donations his families have given. Whatever it is, Scientology was clearly in the courtroom there with Danny, on Danny's side, and not always to his benefit. I mean, we saw his attorneys do some things in court that clearly seemed to be coming from David Miscavige that were not necessarily good for Danny's defense.
That's right.
So, I it's been an odd thing. And this is the number one reason why I was sitting in there. Danny Masterson's a celebrity and he was accused of some terrible crimes, but I was there because I was curious, how much was Scientology going to be involved? And it was much more than I expected.
Exactly. And Dave can't help himself, right? Because he's know best, a term we'll run into later, when it comes to the legal stuff. I mean, I knew even when I was in the Sea Org, from rumor lines, that Miscavige just loves legal and riding that legal stuff. So, that was a thing. Okay. And I will say that I am one of those old school Scientologists who thought Masterson was going to get thrown to the bus right away. And I am absolutely revising my opinion of that right now based on the data. And I said at the time, and I'll reiterate here, his family and his network is what makes Danny Masterson valuable to Scientology. He, as an individual, isn't much, but his family and the connections are. And so where with a Reed Slatkin, who hurt Scientologists, big time, they wouldn't have a problem throwing him under the bus, screw you. But Masterson's got all these connections that are still viable Scientology financial connections. In other words, they can still make a lot of money off these people. And so it's a possibility as to why that is, that he's still being supported by the church, but all under the table. And that would be also an explanation for why they have not said one word about any of this publicly.
Not a word. That's right.
Not a word. So quite interesting developments here, actually. All right, moving on. We had Priscilla Presley. We have these lawsuits that she's sort of enveloped in, and this grandchild comment. And what was the progress this week?
Right. So I'm interested in this case because, Lisa Marie told me herself back in 2015 that she had left Scientology for good, and she had taken out her mother, Priscilla, and her daughter, Riley Keough, with her, and that all three of them were out at that point. But in the years since then, it really looks like Priscilla may be back in. And the one thing that really is kind of hard to ignore is that when this movie about her came out last year, she sat down with Sofia Coppola, the director, and made some videos kind of talking about the movie. And in the video, she's wearing a Scientology pendant. You can see it. So I think Priscilla's back in, and now she's being sued by this woman in Florida that said that a couple years ago Priscilla was in terrible financial shape. This woman helped her get it back on her feet. And then right when things were getting better for Priscilla, she turned her back on this woman. So she's filed a breach of contract lawsuit in Florida, in Orlando. Her name is Bridget Cruz. And then Priscilla and her attorney, Marty Singer, the legendary entertainment attorney, Marty Singer, filed a retaliatory lawsuit in L.A., claiming that this was elder abuse. So there's these competing lawsuits in California and Florida. And Priscilla is arguing that she shouldn't be sued in Florida because she's a California person. Bridget is saying in California, I shouldn't be sued in California because I'm a Florida person. And so they kind of are both trying to use that argument. But what's interesting in Florida was that Priscilla was saying she has nothing to do with Florida. She lives in California. She shouldn't be sued in Florida. But then Bridget came back and said, oh, no, Priscilla's very tied to Florida. She owns some property here. And, oh, by the way, she's got a grandchild with Elvis Presley that lives in Florida. Well, that can't be Riley or the twins. They all live in California. So this was the big shock in Bridget's second amended complaint, was that she's alleging that there's a grandchild that apparently we don't know about in Florida. So this week, the news this week was that Priscilla finally had to answer that new version of the lawsuit. And that came in the other night, and I just grabbed it and went right to that section. And she does address that paragraph by number, that the paragraph 12 in Bridget's second amendment complaint says that her tie to Florida, she's got this grandchild in Florida. And Priscilla's response to paragraph 12 is, well, if I've got relatives in Florida, it's irrelevant. Chris, that's not a denial. She's not denying that she has a grandchild in Florida.
It's a non-denial.
I think that's huge news. And here it is, like 5 days later, and Underground Bunker is still the only outlet that said anything about it. They're very focused on what is happening in L.A. Elder abuse lawsuit, Marty Singer, Priscilla's put in a couple declarations. The press is all over that lawsuit. Nobody's watching the Florida lawsuit. I don't understand it. And here's this allegation of a grandchild. So anyway, I don't know. I just thought it was pretty interesting that Priscilla Presley this week said that, anything about relatives is irrelevant, and did not deny that she's got a grandchild in Florida. Now, that doesn't get us any closer to identifying this grandchild, but I think it's pretty huge that she's not said anything, that she didn't deny it.
Absolutely. It's gigantic, and also makes me immediately wonder, just how effective is your PR team at squelching stories as well as creating counter lawsuits and creating a larger narrative,
Well, I think with her attorney in Florida, she was kind of stuck. They kind of had to answer it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure if they were going to, but I guess they had to. But the LA lawsuit's getting all the press. So she's doing a pretty good job of saying, hey, look what's over here. So the press isn't looking over there.
That's right. That's right. Controlling the
That's
narrative.
okay. They can
Right?
leave it to me, Chris. They can. I'll take care of the Orlando lawsuit. You guys all watch the LA lawsuit. And in the LA lawsuit, there was a very small development also this week. I didn't even write about it at the bunker. One of the people that Marty Singer and Priscilla Presley are suing is an attorney in Florida who was part of this deal that set up these documents that created these corporations that Priscilla, supposedly walked out on. And she is also saying to the California court, I'm not a California person. You can't sue me. I have no ties to California. I'm not, this suit is ridiculous. And the judge this week said she made a very strong argument, but he's going to allow some discovery on that idea of personal jurisdiction, which I think means that Priscilla is going to get a chance to depose this attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of put the brakes a little bit on Marty Singer's big, angry lawsuit in Los Angeles, because that's not the next, the judge said to come back next May, May 2025, come back with some more information about whether this attorney should be in the lawsuit or not. So you talk about putting the brakes a little bit on the lawsuit in LA. I don't know how that's going to affect Bridget, who's also arguing that she shouldn't be in the LA lawsuit. But I just thought it was interesting that this judge is he admitted he's swayed by this Florida lawyer's argument that you can't sue me in California. I got nothing to do with it. So interesting.
Right. Very interesting. All the layers of the legal stuff are so interesting. Also interesting to see that it's not just Miscavige taking advantage of this. Oh no, you can't sue me. I don't belong there. Apparently this is a thing people do. So
yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we're going to see what happens. And yeah, as you said, just keep coming in here, folks. We'll tell you all about it if the LA Times won't. So, okay. Now we're going to dive into couple political oriented stories, but these are Scientology related stories. Let's keep that in mind here. The first one being Elena Cardone, Grant Cardone's wife, showing up on Fox News this week. What was this all about?
Right. So the story with Grant was that a week before the election, he was part of that Madison Square Garden rally that got so much attention. And he did say some pretty off-color things, some pretty crazy things. And, an OTA Scientologist, Diamond Laureate, $15 million donor to the IAS, being featured in a presidential rally like that's news. And I knew that there were some readers that were not happy that I wrote about that at the bunker, but I don't know how I avoid it. And I was saying that, is it the fact that it's a Republican campaign? Because, I've written about a Democratic LA mayor, Karen Bass, and her footsie she's been playing with, Tom Cruise and Scientology. I don't care what political party they're in. OTA Scientologist at the closing argument rally at Madison Square Garden. That's a story. Well, that was a week before the election, and then Trump won on election night. And Fox News, of course, has been doing, kind of victory laps since then. And it was actually one of my more conservative readers that pointed out to me that Elena Cardone had showed up on Jesse Waters' Primetime, and she had just spouted L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology jargon in this segment she was on for a couple of minutes. And, Techie thought that was crazy. And I was glad that he brought it up because, as he said in the piece, and I quoted him, listen, left or right, what does it care? Scientology, we can all agree that Scientology deserves to be investigated, and the government looking into its abuses. So that I thought that was fun that Techie and I kind of teamed up to look at that, and I got a transcript of the segment. And sure enough, Elena Cardone, OTA major donor, Diamond Laureate on Fox News, dunking on the Morning Joe team, which they deserve, by the way. Mika and Joe crawling to Mar-a-Lago to, kiss the ring. She dunked on them, but she used the word obnos on national television. She talked about no-besters in the Democratic Party. She talked about a golden era of the future. I mean, Chris, that's kind of nutty on national TV, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, first off, just so if that word that just cruised by everybody, obnose, This is a Hubbard invented word. This isn't some reworked word. This Hubbard invented that. You're not going to look up a dictionary and find that word. It is pure Scientology, and it is observing the obvious, by the way. That's what that word means. It's seeing what's right in front of you. It's a very slang used word in Scientology. They use it all the time, and she just drops it on Fox News, which is amazing, as well as the know best. This is another term that is all over Scientologists' lips. And it's somebody who thinks they know best, right? It's somebody who's obviously doesn't know, but thinks they do. And of course, Miscavige loves using this term to, downgrade people around him who make mistakes. So it spreads among the, sort of inner circle, you could say. And the Cardones, I would count as inner circle, high level Scientologists at this point. We need to be clear about something with this, at least as far as my interest in discussion about it. I absolutely agree that it is newsworthy. It is also something that Scientology watchers need to have their sort of antenna out for, because for many, many years, we have talked about the concept of PR area control and safe pointing. These are Scientology policies. We're not going to go on a big seminar on it right now. It's just Scientology has a methodology to creating friends and allies in high places. And it works. And for many, many years, we have been wary and like, oh my God, what are they doing every time it comes near politics? Joy Vila was rubbing up against Trump and making some headway, and we were worried. Not because of the red or blue of it. I don't care if they're cozying up to the bluest Democrat there is. I don't want that happening for the Church of Scientology to have political influence. And that is what these folks are doing. And Elena showing up on Fox News, Grant showing up at that at New York. And the efforts that they are making are right in our face. So it would be silly for us to ignore
and then
Scientology.
And then, of course, it gets worse because last week, after President Trump named Matt Gaetz as his attorney general, Mike Rinder at his blog wrote that it's over, folks. Because what people may not realize is that Mike Rinder, Leah Remini, and others behind the scenes have been trying to get the federal government interested in doing something about Scientology. And, people like Mike and Leah have friends in high places. And this is one of the things where I think some people that criticize them don't understand that they can't tell us about all the things they're doing, trying to get through to members of Congress and members of the administration to try to get them interested in investigating Scientology. And Mike says now that, Grant Cardone is giving speeches at Madison Square Garden for Trump, now that Trish Duggan is one of the richest Scientologists in the world, is one of Trump's biggest individual donors, and they both have access to him. And then he nominates somebody like Matt Gaetz for attorney general, who clearly is just somebody that's going to do whatever Trump wants, and it's not, because he hated how independent the attorney general could be. Mike wrote that this is it. There's not going to be any federal action on Scientology for the next 4 years. Well, there's brewing scandal, and Trump had to redo that nomination. And then it got even worse because then he nominated Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General. And as soon as that came out, like Friday afternoon or Thursday afternoon, and that evening, I was getting so many messages from people, Chris, because they know I've been writing about Pam Bondi for years. I believe the Underground Bunker was the first one that wrote something about her being going to a fundraiser at the Baybacks house, big OT Scientologist, and the Tampa Bay Times jumped on that. And then we started hearing she was giving personal appearances at the Fort Harrison Hotel. Well, when I got heard that she'd been nominated by Trump for Attorney General, I decided to go back to the archives and see exactly what we had said about her over the years. And I had forgotten in 20 2019. Was it 2019 or 2016?
Hmm.
I think it was 2016. Um, we have photos of her at the Fort Harrison Hotel,
Yeah.
Scientology's holiest location, giving speeches about human rights and hobnobbing with OTs like what's his name, Jim Mathers. I had forgotten we have photos of her at the Fort Harrison. Oh my God, Chris.
Yeah.
She's made multiple personal appearances at the Fort Harrison. And as far as I know, she may be the only politician who's done that. I mean, I know David Jolly was this congressperson that was playing footsie with Scientology a lot, but I don't know. She may have been there more times than him. I can't think of another, politician that big who has made multiple personal appearances at Flag Land Base. Not just LA, but I mean
Maybe not
Flag Land
since
Base.
maybe not since Sonny Bono.
I mean, incredible.
You
So
know?
so she's tight with them, and now
Yeah.
she's going to be in charge of the Department of Justice. You think any of these mid-level Department of Justice people who are interested in investigating Scientology are going to get anything up the line? No way. No
No,
way. And
no.
that's what Mike Rinder was talking about. And and I don't know that her nomination is going to go through because people are digging up all the things that she went through in 2012 or something, I think. um, this is when Trump University was in big trouble in various states. Come on, Trump University. I don't care what you think of Trump. Trump University was a scam. There's just no question. Trump University was a scam. It was prosecuted all over the place. But after Trump made it, or Trump organization made a $25,000 donation to Pam Bondi's campaign, she decided not to prosecute Trump University. It's a big
That's right.
scandal. I mean,
That was
it's being talked
September
about as an
20.
outright bribe.
Yep.
So this is how tight she is with him.
Yep.
And she may run into trouble being getting that nomination as well. But and believe me, the big news organizations are all pointing out the Scientology thing. I don't think any of them have quite as much as we do as far as the actual photos and accounts of her at Scientology. But wow, I mean, this is like, I mean, what talk about emphasizing what Mike Rinder said just the week earlier. I mean, it's kind of incredible. And then
Yeah.
also, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who's been nominated for national intelligence, right?
Yep.
Director of National Intelligence. It's an interesting, it's not direct, but she's part of this Hindu cult basically in Hawaii
Grew up in it.
that I've written about before, because that cult's attorney is a Scientology attorney. They use the same guy, Anthony Glassman. If when Ortega does something for a publication, they get a letter from Anthony Glassman about what a scumbag I am. That's what Anthony Glassman's job is. He's got my dead agent pack, like Scientology does. And also, he represents this bizarre Hindu cult in Hawaii, this super homophobic Hindu cult in Hawaii that Tulsi Gabbard's part of. So that's another member of the Trump administration. And then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been working with Weisner Baum, the law firm I wrote about at Daily Beast that's involved in the fighting ECT on behalf of CCHR. Robert F. Kennedy works with those guys. He works with those Scientologists. And remember when RFK Jr. showed up at the Scientology Inglewood Community Center with the Nation of Islam 10 years ago to denounce vaccines. So, I mean, there's just a lot of different ways that Scientology is connected to this administration. And that's why I said at the end of that piece, this is shaping up to be the friendliest White House to the Church of Scientology since Bill Clinton gave them tax exempt status in 1993.
That's it. That's basically the summation of it. And it is a from inside the Scientology world, it's the culmination or the progress of years of this safe pointing, years of this work. Cozying up to Pam Bondi could end up having, some massive upstream, ripple effects for the Church of Scientology here.
Well, I mean, think about it. Joy Villa going to the White House to sing the national anthem. That was something we laughed at, and it's kind of crazy. But Pam Bondi's AG. I mean, that's just like this is so beyond that.
Exactly. Exactly. This is, I mean, they play the long game. We talk about this. We tell people this. And sometimes they're like, oh, they're just so Keystone cops, they can't manage their way through anything. And I talk about Miscavige's long-term PR incompetence. But this is a whole different thing. This is the dark, dirty tricks division and the legal stuff. This isn't PR. And Miscavige is not as bad at that stuff as he is at the PR stuff. So, anyway, yeah, as far as Mike's conclusion of this goes, I can't help but agree. Yeah. I don't see any prosecutorial future here against Scientology for anything with these kind of people involved. Okay. More to come, I am sure, as the stories develop. Now, on the other side of the pond, there was an article from Alex about protests. And this, of course, is a subject that may be near and dear to some of our hearts in the near future. What do we have here with protesting Scientology?
Well, readers of the bunker know that Alex Barnes Ross has been working very hard to protest the IAS and also raise a lot of issues with politicians over there and newspapers over there. He's really been working very hard and been doing very effective work. But the big focus this year was, another IAS protest. He was there for 3 days. But what we learned a few weeks before this year's protest was that Scientology this summer had quietly gone to the district council there and asked them to put in place a special legal exception that would literally make it illegal to protest outside of the Scientology headquarters there. Just incredible. And the council said, well, we can't do that. First, what we need to do is take evidence, because they're claiming that these protests by Alex are bigoted and they're disruptive. And so the council, knowing that they couldn't just announce this, they'd have too much trouble. They said, what we're going to do this year is we're just going to take evidence. And so, yes, Friday, I think, was the deadline. And so Alex wrote up this piece for the Underground Bunker saying, okay, all the evidence is in now. Here's what we've told them. Here's what we think Scientology's told them. And now we're just going to have to wait to see what the council does. And of course, Scientology is going to say that these protesters were horrible and disruptive and bigoted. But if you watched any of the video, these were such well-ordered, thoughtful protests that had a very specific message. They were very supportive. The police told them time and again, no, you guys are doing fine. All the disruptions on Scientology's side. So I don't know. I think it would be hard for this council to then come around and say, yeah, this is a problem. You can't protest anymore. I think they're going to have a problem doing that. But Chris, I don't know. Politicians surprise us over here with things like that. So we'll see. But yeah, it was interesting to see Chris kind of Alex summed all that up and talk about, hey, okay, evidence is in. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of those rights that you don't really want to mess around with. And of course, Scientology will push back as hard as they can against anyone trying to exercise the human rights. They do it all the time. It's almost a daily occurrence for them, especially when you're inside that world, as we know. I wanted to point out something that just to really lay it on here in terms of Scientology. I don't know if you all know this, but they have a human rights front group called the Youth for Human Rights, which is an education group to teach kids about human rights. One of the key ones being right to protest. Scientology's made PSAs about this, right? Well,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
In July of 2024, they went to the United Nations and held a human rights summit, forwarding the teaching of human rights to children all over the world while doing this exact thing here of trying to nullify people's human rights when it's against Scientology. Hey, we want you to protest, just not us.
Right.
The hypocrisy runs deep. Yeah. Alex, go. He's doing great. Okay, and finally, we have an update on a Scientology church in Puerto Rico and what they're doing to become ideal. What do we get this week?
Well, yeah, Dave's been doing this Ideal Org program since 2003. and this worldwide effort to turn every normal org into an ideal org. And it got held up because of the pandemic, and then delayed. And then finally this year, he opened 4 of them in quick succession: Austin, Mexico City, Chicago, and Paris. Okay, these were a long time coming. He had his big parties, but what's next, right? And so various cities are fundraising and trying to get things done. It looks like Puerto Rico might be the next one that will be ready. And there's a progression. There's fundraising, there's the purchase of the building, rehab of the building. And one of the later stages is what's called central files. And this is where Scientology is still stuck in the 50s and 60s. They insist that they have dossier on every single person who's ever been at that org or bought a book or took a course, and all on paper, right? And then any auditing notes and ethical notes. I mean, just these giant stacks of paper for every single person, huge files. Well, that's just sort of like a funny trait of Scientology that it's so throwback that way. But for some reason, I don't even know why Dave puts them through this. It's so cruel. Dave apparently insists that you can't open a new ideal org until you go through all of those files and redo them, clean them up, put them in new fancy folders, get them re-alphabetized. It's just this mountain of busy work. And so we know that Puerto Rico has been going through that because they've been talking about it in flyers. And at one point, they were flying high school kids down from Florida to do it. And I kind of pointed out, that's pretty much the definition of trafficking. And so they stopped talking about that. They stopped talking about flying high school kids without paying them. And anyway, so we got a new batch, a couple of messages that were sent out that were forwarded to me from our tipsters. And, you could just see they're going through all this busy work. I don't know, Chris, is there some point to it that an ideal org needs to have these huge paper folders completely redone and re-alphabetized and everything? How does that help this organization?
It doesn't. But internally the logic is that this is the mind of the organization. That's the analogy Hubbard makes with those files specifically that we're talking about. They're called central files, right? And right. So the idea is that you are clearing the organization by sorting out its central files.
I see.
And this will prepare it for, nothing but expansion into the future, because here's the database, which we will bring back all of our existing, past customers. Because the price of admission into central files is that you have to buy something from the church, book, service, whatever. So that's the theory of it. I can tell you from personal long experience that there is no such thing as clearing one of these orgs, and these central files things is just a bunch of nonsense. It's really just a hard copy database system is really how you should think about it. And dossier is the right word because that's spycraft, right? And that's exactly what's going on with Scientology with these files. You described it well. The other thing I thought I might point out is that the 4 orgs that opened, the ideal orgs that were waiting, as you mentioned, that nothing was happening during the pandemic, was what they call a backlog handling. They were just lined up waiting to happen. Right. It wasn't a spike as though they created something big and new in 1 year. And that graph of, ideal orgs is pretty goose eggy. It's pretty like zeros, right? There's nothing much happening there. Whoop, big spike back down to 0. And we don't even know who's next. Right. Guess what? Neither does the Church of Scientology.
Yeah.
This is the most disorganized evolution, as they call it in Scientology. This ideal org program is just random circumstance half the time from inside. And so I just thought I'd point out that this haphazard open an org every couple years kind of thing, that's how effective. And when we talk about David Miscavige's effectiveness as a leader, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, is he sucks.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is because he puts all of his attention on the legal stuff.
Yeah.
It's where he's obsessed with it. So at least that's what I've been told. All right. So thought I'd throw that out there. The trafficking thing, by the way, shouldn't be just kind of pushed under the rug there. Kids trafficking it all the time. This is Scientology.
Yeah.
All right. So, all right. Well, those were the stories we had to cover this week. It was an eventful week. There was a lot going down. Do you have any previews, as I want to ask, for this next week?
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if Pam Bondi can get through her nomination through the Senate.
Yep.
And some of these other folks. And I still want to see what other positions he's filling. IRS commissioner. Who's going to be IRS commissioner under? Yeah. Ian Rafalco joked that Trump's going to nominate David Miscavige IRS commissioner.
It would make about as much sense as some of these others. Makes sense. Okay. Well, folks, let's see what happens. I want to thank you for coming around and watching us. I go over the week's summary for you and encourage you to come back next week. You can see right there on the screen the address for Tony's Substack. Go to it, get signed up, get your daily notifications, and check back with us next week for the summary. Thanks, Tony.
Have a happy Thanksgiving this week, everybody.
Yes, that's right. Happy Thanksgiving. And I will be back, by the way, from my hiatus next weekend. So you've been seeing a show from us on Mondays. I missed that one, but you've been seeing it through November. I'm back on my regular schedule. There will be some changes, but we'll catch you all up on that next week. So see you guys. Bye-bye.